Hello, I'm Darrell Gunter, your host for Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and streaming on the net at WSOU.net. Well, I'm so happy to have Dr. Chris Bonneau and someone that I know very well from my old neighborhood in South Orange, Maplewood, Miss Jordan Fields. And they are authors of the chapter of the Civic Pedagogies, Tearing Down Walls, Teaching Political Science in Prison. Dr. Bonneau and Jordan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So before we dive into your chapter of this edited volume that you did, if you could share with our audience a little bit about your experience and background.
I'll go first. Thank you again for having us. I am a 2020 grad of the University of Pittsburgh, where I studied political science, sociology, and Africana studies. My undergrad courses in political science introduced me to Dr. Bonneau, who worked in the political science department at the time and was my professor for a semester.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so again, thanks for having us. I'm Chris Bonneau. I'm a professor in the political science department at the University of Pittsburgh, currently on assignment as chair of the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. And I also, from 2018 to 2021, served as president of the University Senate at Pitt.
Very nice, very nice. So this book is very interesting. It's part of a 23-chapter book, Civic Pedagogies. What is the overall book about? What do they aim to achieve in this particular book, this edited volume?
So the editors wanted to have a collection not only of like theoretical approaches to how to involve more civic engagement and more community engagement in classrooms, but also some specific examples of programs that professors used at universities and how they, how they operated and kind of maybe give some ideas for others. And so I was approached by the editors, one of whom I know in my professional network,
Mm-hmm.
who knew about the prison project we were doing at the University of Pittsburgh. And she asked if I'd be willing to contribute a chapter. And I said, well, sure, but I'd like to have, one of my students join as a co-author to kind of give the student perspective as well, to give a much more complete flavor of how to go about teaching in prison. So my area of the chapter focused much more on the mechanics of how do you get into prison, how do you build a relationship with prison administration, how do you go about executing this class, where Jordan would talk about her perspectives as a student. And I won't say anything more. I'll leave Jordan to talk about that.
Yeah, my section of the chapter was really focused on how students should engage with our inside classmates. Obviously, this was a very rare learning opportunity for a lot of us on both sides, inside and out. And so I was able to provide some perspective on how inside students should approach the class, how they should approach how outside students should approach the class, how they should approach working with inside students, and making sure that we always remember the context in which we're learning, and that we have a serious privilege in being able to leave our classroom every single week that our inside classmates do not. And I thought it was really important that we kind of reaffirmed the fact that we are not necessarily the center of the classroom, that we always have the opportunity to discuss class matters outside on the campus of the University of Pittsburgh. And so we need to keep our inside classmates centered, and always be thinking about how best to approach class topics.
So how unique is this program at University of Pittsburgh, where you have what you're saying, or inside students working in the same classroom with outside students? When did this program start?
So this program started in 1997, actually at Temple University. Laurie Pompo was the founder of the Inside Out program, and now it is worldwide. There are Inside Out programs in Australia, in the UK, in almost every state, as well in the United States. And so it's a national network. And so we brought it to Pitt in 2016, and taught our first class in 2017. And so the program that and the pedagogy that's used, bringing outside students into prison to have classes as peers with incarcerated students, is not innovative to us, but rather we're an extension of this larger nationwide network, which is really helpful, because one, the program has a reputation with prisons as being safe, as being rigorous, as being legitimate, and so that helps get us into prison. And also having that network provides a lot of resources for me as an instructor for issues that come up that you may not anticipate, or how to handle thorny situations. And so it's been a great resource to ensure that, what we're doing is really both, educationally sound, but
Right.
also, humane.
Humane. And so the inside students, the classroom is in the prison, and then the outside students come into the prison.
Exactly. We would drive about an hour and a half sometimes, I think, during rush hour, to the prison and have our class there on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And every week they would go through security. They would occasionally be, drug swabbed. Sometimes the prison would be on lockdown. I mean, you never knew what you were going to get, week to week.
Wow. Extraordinary. So how did you feel, Jordan, going into a prison environment initially? And how did that evolve over time?
Prior to signing up for this class, I had never been inside a prison. And so in that sense, it was a very new experience. I didn't know what to expect, but also wanted to enter the classroom, without bringing in any preconceived notions that exist on a societal level about prisons or people who are incarcerated, right? Because I am a firm believer that people can be rehabilitated. And I am a firm believer in education for all. And so my goal was to make sure that I wasn't bringing in any external bias to our classroom, because I think that would have just been inappropriate. Over time, we got a lot more used to this process of entering the prison every week, sometimes being stopped, sometimes being searched. And I think for some of us, we began to understand just a small, very small sliver of what our inside classmates felt in terms of how closely they were being watched, how their every movement was controlled. And like I said, very small sliver. We were just walking through metal detectors. These people were, under constant surveillance. And so in that sense, I think it probably grounded a lot of people walking into the classroom, being reminded where we were and that we needed to act accordingly, not just so that this program could continue, but so that we weren't creating situations that would adversely impact our inside classmates as well.
And did they continue with these classes to a point where they would obtain a degree?
Yeah, so that's the aspiration. So we were able to make sure that they all got college credits, for their work in the class. And so those credits, can be helpful for them in terms of parole, in terms of when they get out, maybe transferring them to some other things. We were making progress toward an associate's degree program,
Sure.
before everything shut down with COVID. And that shut us out of the prisons for about 2 full years. And we're just now getting, trying to get some momentum back. So that's challenging. The other part of what's challenging with that is that, at Pitt, we're a very small operation, that we don't have a full-time staff person. We don't we're responsible for raising our own budget, our own funds for the classes, either through internal funds or applying for external funds. And
Mhm.
so we're only able to offer 1 to 2 classes per semester. So at that rate, it will take people a long time to get a degree. I mean, ideally, we'd love to be offering a full complement of classes
Mhm.
across all different fields. But that kind of infrastructure is very time consuming to build.
Mhm.
And we really at this point don't have the kind of person power or administrative support to really get that done in any kind of meaningful fashion.
Okay. All right. And how do you have some early success stories in regards to some folks on the inside have taken a few classes and maybe have helped them to get parole?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So there are a couple. I mean, I can tell. There are a few success stories that stand out. In my first class that I taught in 2017, 2 of the 16 incarcerated students have since been exonerated, completely exonerated. Um, and one is now working as a paralegal for a law firm, and the other is doing a bunch of advocacy work in the Philadelphia area. Um, and they credit the kind of work they did and the thinking they did, and right, the class they said gave them, hope and encouraged them to keep going with their appeals. And I mean, if you look at the statistics on how rare exonerations are, and these guys have been down, one was down like 14 years and one was about 16 years. And to be fully exonerated, 2 out of 16 students in that class, that's amazing. Another case that I consider a success story is I had a student who was a juvenile lifer, and after the Supreme Court decision that said mandatory life sentences for juveniles are not constitutional. He was resentenced, and I testified at his resentencing hearing. And he was able to get one of the lower sentences on the basis not only of the facts of his case, but also on the work he had done while he was incarcerated. Part of it was taking advantage of educational opportunities. And so that helped get him a lower minimum sentence. And so we've had other guys who've been released that I'm in touch with. I have one guy who's working as like a judge of elections for elections part-time, who was in my first class too, which is pretty fun. So there's anecdotal stuff like that, but
Yes.
most of the guys I've taught, at least since 2017, haven't been released yet, right? And some will never be released. But even for the lifers, this gives them something to work towards, or something to challenge themselves with, and something to really, improve their lives in meaningful ways.
And Jordan, from your perspective, how fulfilling is this for you? Because you have always, since I've known you, have been an advocate for people and for doing the right thing. What has this meant to you?
I think more than anything else, this was a really meaningful learning opportunity. But when I reflect on the course, I really try not to center myself or my experience. Because for me, this was a course that I used to earn my bachelor's degree. Um, I'm confident that this class was probably much more meaningful to my inside classmates for the reasons that Dr. Bonneau just listed. And so I love education. I believe in education. I think everyone should have access to it. But again, it was, gosh, I don't know how many credits a class is at Pitt anymore, but maybe 3. I don't know, 3 towards a very large number. Um, I think the course changed my life. I think it's probably the best educational experience I've had. And I think it encouraged a lot of my classmates. Many of us went to law school. I'm talking like a third of the class. And so I think it inspired many of us, but also encouraged us to use our degrees in education for something other than just that sheet of paper and for ourselves.
Right. So let's talk about your chapter. Why did you choose this particular topic for your chapter, Tearing Down Walls, Teaching Political Science in Prison? And what is the essence of the chapter?
So I think, really tried to capture not only how the class functions, but why it's meaningful to kind of bridge this connection between institutions of higher learning and incarcerated people. I think, or I'll speak for myself, and Dr. Bonneau can agree. The goal of this program was, again, not only to bring outside students inside and give them a different perspective on education, but to also provide education for incarcerated people. And so we tried to capture, or at least share with people, how to make this possible and how to replicate it, as we were saying earlier. So we talk not only about, like Dr. Bonneau said, how to build relationships with people on the inside, what it looks like to enter a prison every week, but also what type of content is important to discuss. In our class, we talked a lot about recidivism. We did a really wonderful semester-long project where we worked in groups, both inside and outside students, to deliver a presentation to the Dean of Students of the University of Pittsburgh at the end of the semester. And so we learned how to work together. We learned how to use our lived experiences and research to kind of formulate ideas about what it means to be incarcerated, what recidivism is, what are its main causes, how we can address it, and to basically kind of identify solutions to this issue that we all agreed existed. Oftentimes, we were not always on task when it came to our readings, but we had really meaningful class discussions. And I think we do talk about that in this chapter as well, that you can come up with a set of readings, you can come up with a book that you want everyone to read, but the essence of the class is really discussion, right? And kind of coming as one and talking about this issue that is surrounding us.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan makes a couple of really important points there. So it's, from an instructor's point of view, the content of our class was a seminar on mass incarceration and all the different facets of mass incarceration, which was good because it allowed us to combine, kind of the academic writing on certain topics, like about mental health, about recidivism, about correctional officers, whatever, with people's actual lived experiences. And the topic was fabulous because it allowed the inside guys to feel like they had something to contribute. Part of the success of a class like this is being able to bring together two very different groups of students. One very privileged, one less so, one overwhelmingly white, one less so, one actually almost entirely female, one absolutely not. And so how do you go about building, a classroom where people feel like they're able to speak and share and trust each other, right? In a situation where there is no trust in prison, right? There are no secrets in prison. There's no honesty in prison. And so, the class is only successful if you can do that first. And so in many ways, the topic, right, or the readings were secondary. I mean, if I were to teach this class on campus, I could cover more stuff, but it wouldn't be nearly as impactful or successful. And so part of the learning, part of the experience of it is letting things kind of develop, letting things kind of go, and seeing where that takes you, and not being afraid to lose a little bit of control over the content or a little bit of control over the discussion, and let people work it out. We've had people in class, incarcerated guys, occasionally say something sexist, right, or racist, accidentally, I think, not intending to, and the class can work it out, right? And so these kinds of interactions really make the class.
So with the success, I mean, the two exonerations that you talked about, do you find that the parole boards, have they ever gotten a presentation from you and your class about what your program is all about, what you've learned, and how it has positively impacted the inside students?
So not parole boards, but I will say that my class has had an audience with the Pennsylvania Secretary of Corrections
Okay.
on 2 occasions. The First Lady of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro's wife, Lori, has come to my class
Mhm.
and seen student presentations and interacted with both inside and outside students. And so I think it has had an effect, at that level. Policy change is slow, and in Pennsylvania, the correctional system is not very progressive.
Mhm.
But getting, eyes on the program and getting people who are able to make policy changes exposed to what exactly is going on. And that's not just about what we're doing at Pitt or our class, but it's about all the inside out classes across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Penn State has some, Temple has a bunch, right? We're not alone. But bringing more awareness to this program at kind of the highest levels of government leadership can only, lead to positive outcomes down the road.
Absolutely. Jordan, your thoughts?
Um, I actually didn't know that the First Lady of Pennsylvania has sat in on the presentation. So that is really awesome. And I'm really happy to hear that. Like I mentioned during my class, I think it was the dean of students and maybe a vice provost who sat in on our presentations. And even for me, that was really meaningful to have people who were in administrative positions at the university take the time to come in and watch these students because technically they are Pitt students, in my opinion.
Right.
They're learning from the University of Pittsburgh.
Mm.
But I think what this tells me is that we are showing people that there's not only value in these programs, but that there's value in these students, right? They're just non-traditional students. And so, as Dr. Bonneau mentioned, I think only positive things can come from change makers being exposed to this program and actually watching student presentations.
And that's how we started getting credits for the incarcerated students, because early on, I was also president of faculty at the time, and so I had access to the provost and other high-ranking administrators, and so I invited the provost in the class, and we drove down together, and I had university legal counsel there. I had, I think, the dean at the time. I mean, we've had so many people come through, and on the way back, the provost at the time asked me, "Do these students get credits?" And I said, "Well, no." And she said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, you're the provost, you tell me." No lie, 6 weeks later, we had a plan in place to get them credits and retroactive to people who had taken the classes before. So everyone who has taken a class at Pitt, right, has received credits for that class. And all of that, right, was because I had the access to invite her. She felt, she was a new pro at the time. I think she may have felt like, oh man, I should do this part of the thing. And then it went from there. And so that's the kind of, you know, that can happen, right? When you get the right people in the room looking at the program. And from my perspective, it's just incredibly validating. And the same is true, I think, for the inside students, that here's an institution, right? A top 20 public institution in the US who thinks this kind of work is important and is willing to recognize that work by the incarcerated students, right? And they're getting Pitt transcripts with Pitt credits for free. I mean, that's the kind of thing that can really make a difference.
Wow. And how large are the classes, and what is the composition inside versus outside students?
So the classes are generally 32,
Mm.
16 Pitt students and 16 incarcerated students.
Mhm.
Um, the makeup, you have among the incarcerated students, you have guys in their early 20s, you have guys in their early 60s. You have some people who are 1 or 2 semesters short of a college degree, and you have some who dropped out in the 6th grade.
Mhm.
So you really they all have to have at least a GED,
Mhm.
um, to be in the class. But you really get a wide variety of experiences. You got a lot of guys from Philly, um, quite a few from Pittsburgh, but you also got some from rural PA too. Um,
Mhm.
and so there really is this complete mix of backgrounds. As I mentioned, the Pitt students are overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly female.
And so what does success look like when you look at it from an academe reader perspective? Someone buys your this particular book and they read the chapter. What is it that you want them to come away with? Or is there a call to action that you want them to do?
I hope people see value in incarcerated people. I
Mhm.
hope people understand that they are deserving of educational opportunities,
Mhm.
um, that they deserve to pursue higher education inside and outside. And I think success is not necessarily a letter grade, but a changed perspective for both the inside student, the outside student, and readers. I don't think there is any marker of success other than growth and a willingness to learn about other people's lived experience, including incarcerated people.
Mhm.
Yeah, and for me, I view this as just one cog or one piece of a bigger puzzle. And so I can think about success on a more micro scale. You know, have the are we a right? Incarcerated students will report that this is the first time they've had someone in education believe in them. They were uncertain if they could really hang with the Pitt students, and then they found out they could.
Mhm.
Uh, they were unsure about their abilities, but then through all the reading and writing, they gained more confidence, which all those little things at the micro level are a success. And with the chapter, if it motivates or plants a seed for other people to kind of join this project, join this endeavor, then that's a success. And so I think, to be realistic, right? It's about, how are we bettering lives, one person at a time. And for the outside students, if you don't leave this class changed, you did it wrong. And I
Mhm.
can say, I've done 6 classes, I believe. Uh,
Mhm.
and I can count on one hand the number of students who I think really did not get anything out
Mhm.
of the class. Or if they got anything, they got the wrong things out of the class, right? They thought it was going to be some kind of like um, social movement and it's not. It's an educational program. And um, on the aggregate level, I think there's been a lot of success.
We just have a couple of minutes left, believe it or not. Time flies. But tearing down walls, how did you come about that particular title for your chapter?
It's a good question. Did I come up with that, Joan, or did you?
No, you came up with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I always try and have like as catchy titles to academic things to kind of get people's. And
Mhm.
really, I mean, that's what the project is about, right? So we think about prison, right? It's walls. I mean, and in fact, it's actually kind of shameful how often our public schools kind of are built like prisons. But you have the walls, and so one of the things that separate the inside students from the outside students are these walls and the ability of us to basically come through those walls as we want and leave while we want. And so that can be that kind of physical barrier can really be in a barrier to having a shared experience because we're there for 2.5 hours once a week for
Mhm.
15 weeks. We
Mhm.
only see a little bit. Um, and so part of making that group cohesive, as I talked about earlier, of having one class out of two very different populations with different experiences and different backgrounds and so on,
Mhm.
requires us to tear down a lot of walls, not only physical walls, but emotional walls and psychological walls. And
Mhm.
so I think, I mean, I can't tell you exactly what I was thinking, but it seemed like an apt metaphor for the kind of enterprise that
Mhm.
that we're engaged in.
Yeah. Jordan, we want to give you the last word.
Hmm, what to say? I think this was a really wonderful writing experience for me, and I'm so thankful that Dr. Bonneau asked me to join him in co-authoring this. I think, again, this was the most meaningful learning experience I've had in my life, and I do sincerely miss my inside classmates. They were some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and I hope they know how much we believe in them. And I hope they know how much we believe they deserve to have that learning experience. And I hope that they're doing well.
Wow. Well said. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Dr. Chris Bonneau and Jordan Fields. They're authors of the chapter Civic, Pedagogies, Tearing Down Walls, Teaching Political Science in Prison. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thanks so much.
Well, that wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter. And we want you to have a great day. But remember, leadership begins with you.